Abeni was just 10 years old, but her joy could light up a whole room. She lived in the small, colourful town of Ecom, where the air was always warm and filled with the smell of roasted corn and fresh rain. Abeni's smile was the brightest thing around, brighter than the morning sun, warmer than the midday heat. She had big, curious eyes and two deep dimples that danced on her cheeks every time she laughed. And today, her smile was even bigger than usual. It was almost her birthday. She had been counting down for weeks, crossing out days on the calendar with a red crayon. Just one more sleep, she whispered excitedly to herself, hugging her pillow tight. Her birthday dreams weren't big or fancy. She didn't wish for toys or shiny things. All she wanted was a sweet cake with pink icing, laughter with the neighbors' children, and, most of all, her father's hug, the one where he held her close and whispered, "My little sunshine." Abeni missed her mother, who had passed away years ago, but her father, Obasi, had always tried to make her feel safe and loved. He worked hard in the local market, selling tools and fixing things for people, but no matter how tired he was, he always came home with a joke or a warm smile for her. That night, as Abeni laid out the yellow dress her late mother had sewn before she died, she smiled so wide her cheeks hurt. Tomorrow would be special. It had to be, because in her heart, she believed birthdays were for feeling loved, and Abeni had never stopped believing in love. Abeni was only 5 when her mother passed away. It was a quiet Sunday morning when her mother's soft singing stopped forever. One moment, she was brushing Abeni's hair and humming their favorite song. The next, she was gone. They said it was a sickness that took her, but to Abeni, it just felt like the world lost its color. Her mother had been the soft voice in the house, the warm hands that made everything better, and the heart that beat in time with hers. After that day, the house felt quieter. Even the birds outside seemed to sing less. Her father, Obasi, tried his best to fill the space her mother left behind. He smiled for Abeni, told her stories, and held her whenever she cried. But sadness lived in his eyes, and after 2 years, he married again. Her name was Ngozi. At first, Ngozi seemed kind. She brought Abeni sweet bread from the market and called her "my dear" in front of the neighbors. She laughed loudly at gatherings and always looked neat and proud. But behind closed doors, things were different. Abeni began to notice the way Ngozi looked at her, not with love, but with something sharp, like anger mixed with envy. She didn't like the way Abeni's eyes sparkled, or how people in the community often said, "She looks just like her beautiful mother." Ngozi never raised her hand, but her words cut deep. "Don't be too proud," she would say when Abeni smiled at herself in the mirror. Pretty girls get into trouble. She found fault in everything. Abeni's voice, her hair, the way she walked, even the way she laughed. And when Obasi wasn't around, the warmth in the house turned cold again. Abeni never complained. She thought maybe this was just how things were now. Maybe stepmothers weren't meant to love the same way. But deep down, a part of her still held on to her mother's last hug, her last lullaby, her soft fingers braiding her hair. That memory stayed with her, like a small flame she kept hidden in her chest, hoping one day someone would see it again and say, "You are loved just as you are." The morning of Abeni's birthday was supposed to be the happiest day of the year. She woke up early, her heart full of joy, her smile bright and full of hope. The little yellow dress her mother had sewn for her before she passed away was laid out neatly on the bed. Abeni slipped into it slowly, carefully, like it was made of gold. It still smelled faintly of her mother, of roses and warm hugs. Her hands shook with excitement as she brushed her long, soft hair. The same hair everyone always said looked just like her mother's. She looked at herself in the mirror and whispered, "Happy birthday, Abeni." Her eyes sparkled. She felt beautiful. She felt loved. She felt ready to see her father's proud smile when he returned from the market. But then, the door creaked open. Ngozi stepped into the room, holding a pair of scissors in her hand. At first, Abeni thought maybe it was to help with some decorations, but there was no smile on her face this time. Her eyes were cold, quiet, dangerous. "You think you're a queen, don't you?" Ngozi said sharply. "Looking at yourself like that, you're too proud." Before Abeni could speak, before she could even move, she felt the cold metal against her scalp, a rough tug, a sickening snip. "Ngozi, please!" Abeni cried, frozen in shock. But the cutting didn't stop. Ngozi kept going, lock after lock, her long, beautiful hair falling like feathers to the floor. Abeni sat still, tears streaming down her face, her little heart breaking in pieces with every strand. The housemaid, Ika, rushed in when she heard the cries. She gasped, hand over her mouth. "Madam, no! What are you doing?" she shouted. But it was too late. When it was over, Abeni sat silently, hair scattered like fallen dreams around her feet. The yellow dress still hugged her small frame, but the light in her eyes was gone. She didn't understand why. What had she done so wrong? Was loving herself a crime? All she had wanted was cake, laughter, and her father's warm hug. But now, all she felt was shame. And her birthday, her special day, had turned into a nightmare no one would ever forget. Obasi came home that evening with a small cake in his hands and a big smile on his face. He had even bought pink candles, just like Abeni always wanted. He couldn't wait to see her face light up. As he stepped through the door, he called out, "Birthday girl, where's my sunshine?" No answer. The house was too quiet. No laughter, no running feet, just silence. Then he saw her. Abeni sat on the floor in the corner of the living room, her yellow birthday dress wrinkled and stained with tears. Her hands were covering her face. All around her were pieces of her hair, those beautiful, long strands that once reminded him so much of her late mother. Obasi froze. The cake nearly dropped from his hands. "What happened?" he asked, his voice shaky. Ngozi rushed forward quickly, putting on that familiar sweet smile. "Oh, it's nothing," she said. "Just a little misunderstanding. You know how children can be. She was misbehaving, acting rude." Obasi didn't move. He just stared at his daughter. "Abeni?" he asked softly. "What happened?" Slowly, Abeni lifted her tear-streaked face. Her lips trembled, but she looked straight at him. "She said I was too proud to wear my hair," Abeni whispered. "So she took it away." The room went silent. Obasi dropped the cake. His hands began to shake. His eyes filled with tears. And for a moment, he couldn't speak. He looked at the scissors on the table. He looked at the hair on the floor. He looked at his little girl, his sunshine, who now sat in shame on what should have been the happiest day of her life. Ngozi tried to speak again, but Obasi held up his hand. "Don't," he said firmly. His voice was low, but it carried more weight than any shout. In that moment, the truth hung in the air like smoke. There were no more lies that could cover it. No excuse could fix what had been done. Obasi didn't raise his voice. He didn't storm out. He just stood there, broken, knowing he had failed to protect the one person who trusted him with all her heart. And Abeni's one sentence, so small, yet so full of pain, was louder than any scream. She took it away. Obasi didn't say much after Abeni told him what happened. He just stood there, quiet, with tears slowly rolling down his cheeks. His heart felt heavy, like it was carrying the weight of a storm. He looked at his daughter, her head now bare, her face swollen from crying, and something inside him broke, not in anger, but in love. Without a word, he turned around and walked out the door. The neighbors watched from their windows. Some had heard the shouting. Some had seen Abeni run into the house earlier that day, but no one said anything. They just watched as Obasi made his way down the dusty road toward the market, his steps slow but sure. About an hour later, he returned. In his hands was a small, carefully wrapped box. Abeni was still sitting in the same corner, hugging her knees. She didn't look up until he knelt beside her and gently touched her hand. "I have something for you," Obasi said softly. She turned her head, her eyes still red. He opened the box slowly, and inside was a wig, thick, black, and soft. But it wasn't just any wig. It was made from her late mother's hair, which Obasi had quietly saved after she passed. He had always planned to keep it safe, maybe for a special moment. Now he knew this was that moment. Obasi placed it gently on Abeni's head. His hands trembled, but his heart was steady. "Your mother gave you that crown," he whispered, brushing a strand from her face. "And I'll help you wear it again." The housemaid covered her mouth and began to cry. Even the neighbors outside, who had come closer to listen through the windows, couldn't hold back their tears. Some wept openly, others wiped their eyes in silence. In that moment, no one spoke, but everyone felt it. The power of a father's love, the quiet strength of a little girl, and the beauty of something broken being made whole again. Abeni looked up at her father, her face still soft with sadness. but something in her eyes had changed. A small spark returned. She didn't need to say thank you. Her smile, small, tired, but real, said everything. The next morning, the story had already spread across Icom like wildfire. It started with the housemaid, Eka, who couldn't keep it inside any longer. She whispered it to the woman selling yams at the corner. That woman told her neighbor, and by afternoon, nearly everyone in town knew what had happened to little Abeni on her birthday. People were shocked, angry, hurt. How could someone cut a child's hair out of spite? How could anyone take something so special from a girl who had already lost her mother? Mothers began arriving at Obasi's gate, some with their own daughters, some with plates of food, some just to say, "We're so sorry." The women of Ecom didn't stay silent. They gathered under the big mango tree near the house, voices rising like a storm. "This is not just about hair," one woman shouted. "This is about a child's dignity." Another said, "Today it's Abeni, tomorrow, whose daughter?" Even the men in the town began to speak up. Some shook Obasi's hand with respect. Others apologized for not stepping in sooner. It was like the whole town had suddenly opened its eyes. Abeni's teacher came to visit later that day. She hugged Abeni tight and said, "You are brave, and we want the other girls at school to know that too." She invited Abeni to speak at assembly about self-worth and standing tall, even when others try to bring you down. At first, Abeni was nervous, but when she stood in front of her classmates, wearing the wig made from her mother's hair, she felt something she hadn't felt in days: pride. Her voice was small, but clear. "They took my hair," she said, "but not my crown." The children clapped. The teachers wiped their eyes. And in that moment, Abeni felt taller than ever before. As for Ngozi, she couldn't hide anymore. Wherever she went, people looked at her differently. The smiles she used to wear in public no longer fooled anyone. The truth had found its voice, and the town had finally found the courage to stand with the little girl who used to suffer in silence. Ecom was changing. Because of Abeni, Obasi had never been a loud man. He didn't like drama or attention. But after what happened to Abeni, something inside him changed. He couldn't stay silent anymore, not as a father and not as a man. He knew what people would say, that a man shouldn't leave his wife. That separation brought shame. But to him, the real shame would be letting his daughter grow up in a house where love didn't feel safe. So, one bright morning, Obasi walked into the town office and filed for separation. No secret, no hiding. He signed the papers with steady hands and a steady heart. Then he walked out, stood in front of the building where people were watching, and said, "A home is not a home if a child lives in fear. I won't let my daughter break just to keep my pride." The town went quiet. For a moment, all you could hear was the wind in the trees. Then, slowly, heads began to nod. The news spread fast, and it hit hard. Not because it was a scandal, but because it was rare. Rare to see a father put his child's heart before his own image. Rare to see a man stand up and say, "This is not okay." The other men in Ecom began to talk among themselves. Some sat quietly on porches, thinking about their own homes. Others looked at their daughters and wondered if they'd ever miss the signs of hurt. Obasi had started something, not just a personal decision, but a shift in the way people thought about fatherhood. Some praised him. Some whispered behind his back, but he didn't care. He came home, hugged Abeni, and told her, "This house is yours again. No one will hurt you here." Abeni didn't say much. She just leaned into his chest and stayed there for a long time, listening to the beat of the heart that had chosen her over everything else. And that was when the town began to truly understand. Strength wasn't in silence. It was in love, in protection, in doing the right thing. Even when it was hard, Obasi didn't just change his home. He changed the way fathers in Ecom saw their role, and their daughters. Abeni could have stayed quiet. She could have hidden away until her hair grew back, avoided the stares, and tried to forget everything. But something had changed in her, something powerful. The pain she felt on her birthday didn't make her weaker. It made her stronger. And instead of burying that pain, she turned it into a purpose. One morning, sitting with her father under the mango tree, she said, "Papa, I want to help girls like me, girls who are hurting but don't know how to speak." Obasi looked at her, surprised but proud. He nodded slowly and said, "Then let's do it." And just like that, the crown within was born. It wasn't anything big at first, Just Abeni talking to a few girls in her school, sharing her story in simple words. She spoke about feelings, how it's okay to cry, how it's okay to feel broken, but it's never okay to stay silent when someone is hurting you. She told them about her mother's hair, about the scissors, and how pain doesn't get to define who you are. Girls began opening up. One said her aunt called her useless every day. Another said her older cousin made her feel small and stupid. And one by one, they started to speak and to heal. Abeni didn't wear wigs all the time anymore. Sometimes she walked with her shaved head uncovered, chin high, eyes bright. It became her badge of courage. People didn't whisper anymore. Instead, they smiled. They pointed her out to their daughters and said, "Look, that's the brave girl with the crown inside." With the help of her teacher and Obasi, Abeni organized small gatherings at school. They painted, they wrote letters to themselves, they wore headbands with golden paper crowns. Every meeting ended with the same words Abeni always said: "Your worth is not in your clothes or your silence. Your crown is within." And slowly, the girls of Ecom began to believe it. Abeni didn't just heal from her pain, she used it to light a path for others. Her dream wasn't just to feel whole again, it was to make sure no girl ever felt small for being strong, and that dream was only just beginning. Months passed. The town of Ecom began to shine in a new way. Children smiled more, girls walked taller. Abeni's story had planted seeds, and her project, The Crown Within, was blooming. People didn't just remember her pain, they remembered her power. The air felt different, like healing had swept through the streets. And then, one quiet afternoon, Ngozi came back. She didn't come with pride this time. There was no polished smile, no fancy clothes. Just a tired woman with worn-out shoes and eyes that no longer held the sharpness they once did. She stood at the edge of Obasi's compound, holding a small bag and looking unsure of herself for the first time. Some neighbors saw her and whispered. Others didn't even look her way. A few children pointed and asked, "Is that the woman who hurt Abeni?" Their mothers gently pulled them away. Ngozi walked to the door, knocked softly, and waited. Obasi opened it, stood there for a moment, and said nothing. Behind him, Abeni peeked out from the living room, her head still shaved, her eyes calm, her presence quiet but powerful. "I just came to say I'm sorry," Ngozi whispered. Obasi looked her in the eye and replied, "We've already healed. There's nothing for you here." Then he closed the door. That was it. No shouting, no insults, just silence. Ngozi turned around slowly. She had expected anger, maybe even hate, but what she got was worse. Emptiness. The people she used to greet on the road no longer waved back. The women she gossiped with now crossed the street when they saw her. Even the hair salon where she used to brag and show off quietly removed her name from their client list. Karma didn't scream or punish her with thunder. It just erased her. She was still alive, still breathing, but the respect, the power, the image she had built for herself was gone. No one cared about her apologies now. The girl she had once tried to break had become the voice of a generation. And Ngozi, she became a reminder that cruelty always comes back, not with noise, but with silence. In Ecom, her name faded like dust in the wind, and no one missed it. A year had passed, but Ecom still remembered. The town that once stayed quiet had found its voice, and at the heart of it all stood Abeni, no longer the little girl who cried on her birthday, but the girl who turned her pain into power. Her next birthday wasn't about cake or balloons. It was about something much bigger. The sun was shining as people gathered near the old town hall. There was music in the air, laughter all around, and a big red ribbon tied across the gates of a brand new building, a shelter for girls who needed safety, love, and a place to heal. Obasi had used his savings to fund it, naming it after Abeni's mother, the Amaka Home for Girls. Abeni stood at the front, wearing a simple white dress and a golden headband shaped like a crown. Her smile was steady, proud. She held a pair of scissors in her small hands, surrounded by girls she had helped, girls who now stood taller because of her. Before cutting the ribbon, she looked at the crowd. Her voice was clear, full of warmth and strength. "Last year I lost something," she said, "but I found something better. I found my voice, I found my crown, and now I want every girl to know, love doesn't cut you down, it lifts you." And with that, she cut the ribbon. The crowd erupted in cheers. People clapped, some cried. Abeni turned to her father, who was wiping his eyes, and gave him the brightest smile Ecom had ever seen. That birthday didn't just belong to Abeni, it belonged to every girl who had ever been made to feel small, and from that day on, Ecom was never the same again.